Welcome to this breakaway crochet tutorial. This video goes along with the written pattern for this Wagon Wheel Knot Bag, which you can download for free from my Ravelry pattern store. While the written pattern sets out the full step-by-step instructions for this project, in this video I will focus more on specific concepts that might be hard to understand by reading the pattern alone. And if you haven't done so already, I strongly suggest that you watch a previous tutorial where I gave a much more thorough explanation of the techniques we will be using here. So, to ensure you understand all the essential skills required for this project, begin by making this sample swatch from the tutorial. Aside from visiting my Ravelry pattern store, you may also like to check out my Breakaway Crochet website for more tutorials, as well as the motif library, project ideas, inspiration, and much more. Please see the description for links to all these resources. So now I'd like to take you through the steps of making this bag. And as you probably already know, if we want to work all the motifs in this bag continuously, we have to follow a specific sequence. And since this bag is not a flat shape, we will have to follow a very specific sequence that might not make a lot of sense to you at first glance. So instead of trying to explain everything ahead of time, I will instead explain the twists and turns of this project as we go along. So let's start the very first wheel of the starting sequence. And as for all wheels in this project, we start with a floating double treble. And just to refresh your memory on that, a floating double treble starts with 3 yarn overs, and then we make the floating ring. To make the floating ring, do another yarn over and pinch the yarn near the hook. Another yarn over and draw that in with what you're already pinching. 2 pinched loops. Continue with another yarn over and pull through the 2 pinched loops. And those 2 loops there are the floating ring. That's where we will be working all of the stitches of the motif into that floating ring. Now let's continue with the double treble part by using the loops that are already on the hook. I'll finish it off with another yarn over, draw through 2 loops 4 times, just to use up all the loops that are remaining on the hook. And that is our floating double treble stitch. Continue with chain 2 and another double treble into the floating ring. And we continue that sequence of chain 2, double treble, until we have 5 double trebles in this motif. So there's our 5 double trebles, or 5 spokes in this wagon wheel. Finish this one off with chain 2, and we are now at the breaking point of this wheel, which means it's time to work the next wheel. Start the next wheel again with a floating double treble. And now in this next chain 2 space we are about to make on this wagon wheel, we have a joining point. So that means we are going to join the space we are about to make here to the last space we made on the previous wheel. So remember to do that. Start with chain 1, which starts the chain 2 space. Let's pause, find the first chain 2 space behind the hook, which is this one here, work a slip stitch into that chain 2 space, chain 1, that's the join made, and now let's continue with our second wagon wheel with another double treble, and we continue our double treble chain 2 sequence until this time we have 7 spokes in this second wagon wheel. So there's the 7th stitch in this wheel, end with chain 2, and now we're ready to break away to the next wheel, which will be exactly like this one here. So from now on, to finish this starting sequence, we need to do 5 more wheels, just like we've done here. I'll go ahead and work those and meet you when I'm done. And here is the completed starting sequence. Again, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wagon wheels with 7 spokes each, and the very first one only has 5. It's a good idea to make sure you've got the right number of spokes because it's a long way back if something's wrong and you have to frog all the way back to this starting sequence. So for the next section, we will be working on the base of the bag, which will be 3 wheels that sit right at the bottom. I'm just turning things upside down here because we are going to be changing direction in terms of how we're making each wheel. So for these 3 wheels, they're going to veer off at an angle to this piece here. And also from now on, instead of really going through stitch by stitch, I'm going to be talking about how many joins you start a motif off with and how many spokes you work until the breakaway point. That will be common pretty much with all the rest of our wheels. So what I mean is, when we start our next wheel, again with the floating double treble, and the first join as usual, chain 1 and another double treble. Now we need to think about the breakaway point for this wheel, and it happens to come pretty quickly. So just do chain 2, another double treble, and chain 2. And for this particular wheel, we only have 3 spokes before we are at the breakaway point. Now the next wheel sits kind of in the middle here. This wheel is too big for this project, but that gives you an idea of where it will sit. And because it's sitting here, it's joining to this wheel and to this one. And that also means we have 3 joining points. One here, and one here. So we start the next wheel with 3 joining points. So there's the first one made, and just a reminder, when we skip from joining to one motif to the next, as we are finding the next joining point, remember we've got a lot of stuff happening behind the hook until we get to the joining point here. So this space here is actually the first space we are looking at behind the hook. Since it has no slip stitches in it, it just looks like a plain old ordinary chain 2 space. So that is where the second join will go. Double treble. Let's do chain 1 and look for the second joining point, which is just the next one along. And double treble. And as kind of a formula which kind of will sort of be a reminder of when you are through joining. So these two joins mean that we are finished joining this wheel to this one. And a way to kind of check that is, if we were trying to figure out, oh, do I need another join here? Well, if the next space is in the same wheel as the previous two, then you're through joining. So that's just a little formula to help you remember and not have to refer to the pattern quite so much. So let's continue to the breakaway points of this wheel. And we're going to continue until we have all 7 spokes for this wheel. Here's the 7th spoke and chain 2. So that's the middle base wheel started. There's our first one, there's a second one. And the third wheel of the base is going to sit here at the end. And because it's sitting at the end, we are going to start with just that first joining point and work it all the way around, and then close it off like we normally do here. So I'm going to work this wheel here until the 12th spoke. So there's all 12 spokes. Close the wheel. Remember how to do that with a chain 1, slip stitch into the next chain 2 space, and chain 1. So that's the third or last base wagon wheel done. Let's finish the next one by adding 5 more spokes. So that now has all its 12 spokes. Chain 1, slip stitch in the next chain 2 space, and chain 1. That's the middle wheel finished. And we're also going to finish off the first one. So do the 9 more spokes and finish it off in that chain 2 space. So there's our 3 base wheels finished and the starting sequence hanging down that way. So before we move on, I would like you to mark the wheels. And to do that, I'd like you to pick out 3 stitch markers that are all the same color that will go into the 3 base wheels. I want to keep those 3 separate from the others. And then for the rest of the wheels, you can put any color you like, as long as it's not the same as the base wheels, just to keep everything straight. And now that everything is marked, let's move on to the next stage of this bag, which is to continue making the base. So I'm just going to flip things around because we will be continuing our work right here. And that puts it right side up for now, at least. So from now on, we will be expanding the base of the bag by surrounding these 3 wheels with more wheels. So we're going to work kind of in rounds and expand the base of the bag, and it will kind of turn into kind of an oblong shape. All right, and so the next step in doing that is to, here's where our hook is, we're looking at the next marked wheel, and we're going to take a few more bites out of it. We are going to work a couple more spokes on this wheel to get us to the breaking point for the next wheel that will sit next door. So just work 2 more spokes into this next wheel. And of course end with the chain 2. And we now have our next wheel, which will sit right in here. that next wheel starts with 3 joins, 1, 2, 3. So I'll just start that with the first 3 joins. And the breaking point happens after chain 2, double treble, chain 2. So this wheel here is 5 spokes. That's okay, that's all we need. And the next 2 wheels, which we'll keep continuing around this first base wheel here, are worked exactly the same way. So work 2 more wheels with the first 3 joins and a total of 5 spokes. So there we are, those 2 work there, total of 3 wheels with 5 spokes each. Now we've got 2 more wheels that follow along, and they are slightly different. They begin with more joins. So instead of 3, the next 2 wheels will begin with 5 joins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for this wheel. And once the 5 joins are made, you end at the breakaway point when you have 7 spokes. So I'll go ahead and work these 2 7-spoke wheels for you with the 5 joins to start. And there we have those 2 finished. We continue with 3 more wheels around this base wheel. 1, 2, 3. And the next 3 are worked just like we did these here at the beginning, with starting with 3 joins and working 5 spokes and then breaking away. So do those 3 wheels here. And just reminding you that all wheels end with chain 2 after the last spoke you're working before you go to the next wheel. And now that those 3 5-spoke wheels are finished, it's time for the last wheel of the round, which will sit right in here. And it's a little bit different in that we are going to work it all the way around, and it's going to start with 9 joins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're joining in some more wheels from our starting sequence to make this wheel. So I'll go ahead and do that. We'll work all 12 spokes with the 9 joins, and we finish it off with the chain 1 slip stitch into the chain 2 space, chain 1. So there's that last wheel finished, ending again with chain 1, slip stitch, chain 1. And now it's time to come back the other way and finish off these wagon wheels in a return row. And in plain English, instead of referring quite so much to the pattern, just look at how many spokes are in the next wheel and figure out how many you have left to do. So of course this one has 5 spokes, so you need to work the 7 spokes to finish it off, chain 1, slip stitch, chain 1, and move on. So just work your way around, making sure all of these wheels have all 12 spokes. Of course, this last wheel, you only need to add 3 more here. And again, you finish it off with the slip stitch, chain 1 into that chain 2 space, chain 1, and that ends the return row. So here's what things should look like at the end of the first return row. There should be 10 new wheels surrounding the base wheels, and each of these new wheels should have 12 spokes. And just remember, we close that last one off with the chain 1, slip stitch, chain 1, and that space there. Now to start the next joined foundation row, There's really not a lot of difference other than there will be more wheels that will go around the edge, and the sort of the pattern of which wheels have 5 spokes and which have 7 kind of swap around a little bit more. So, so just to talk you through that, again, you're going to start with 2 more spokes in this next marked wheel here, and then make your way around. So again, you're either going to have 3 joins and 5 spokes, or 5 joins and 7 spokes. Those are your only 2 choices. So you can read the pattern, but by now you might have that intuition to know enough to get around without the pattern. Just work your way all the way around. And remember, for that last wheel, it's still going to go all the way around, and that will be where we will come back and work the return row. But before we start the return row, I've worked that next joined foundation row, and I just like to help you check your work before we go on. So at the end of the second joined foundation row, that first marked wheel should have 9 spokes, and now let's count and make sure we have the correct number of spokes for the rest of the wheels. This next one should have 7 and 5, 7, 5, 7, 5. The next 3 have 7, then 5, 7, 5, 7, 5. And then, of course, that last wheel that goes all the way around. Now, as far as the joins go, don't worry about counting those now, because that number will be different. Because once you make your initial joins and you start your next piece or next wheel, the join count will be different. So if you're worried about if you haven't done any of the joins properly, the way to check that again is you should never have more than 2 joins between 2 wheels. Alright, so if something's not laying flat, you've either left one out or done too many. Alright, so at this stage the piece should be lying flat, and if it is, I suspect you have joined everything correctly. Now for the second return row, things are going to be pretty easy. We are still going to go all the way around and finish off all of these wheels we've started. But with this row, we are only going to add 5 spikes in every wheel, or spokes I should say. So it doesn't matter how many spokes the wheel already has. For every wheel, finish off with 5 spokes. That means some wheels will end up with a total of 10 spokes, and the other wheels will have 12 spokes. And of course, the only exception, when you go back to the beginning, you just finish that one off with 3 spokes. So I've gone ahead and worked that second return row for you, and by now you will have a total of 16 wheels around the edge, and you might notice at this point that things are not laying perfectly flat, and that's what we want. Things are not flat because of, remember how some wheels only have 10 spokes, so those wheels will start to sort of cup, and we want that because that helps us with the transition into making the bag sides. So that kind of helps us curve up, and so the next step is to work the sides. And also something else that helps us is that every wheel on this row will have 4 available joining points here around the outside. So that's another way to check your work. 4 spaces available on every outside wheel. And of course, like I said, the next step is to now start the sides. And to do sides, that's exactly the same process, where we start at our marked wheel, add a couple more spokes, But this time, every wheel around the edge will be worked in exactly the same way. That's to say, it will have 5 joins and 7 spokes to start with. Of course, except for that very last wheel where we work all the way around. So that will be 9 joins and 12 spokes for that last wheel there. So continue, working your joined rows and then your return rows all the way up. And of course, we're incorporating our starting sequence for each row. So we're thinking of each of these marked wheels as the first wheel of each row. And just continue on until we've gobbled up all these wheels here. The last stitch going in that chain 2 space there. So in other words, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 rows where we're working the side wheels, and once that's done, we're going to have this little purple marked 5 wheel or 5 spoke wheel left over at the end. So that's the stopping point there. And here's all these sides complete. And I've just folded the bag kind of in half with, remember how we have those 3 wheels at the bottom marked? They should be kind of at the bottom of the fold, and everything folded in this way to check to make sure everything is lined up. So the back there should look the same as the front, except for we've got that extra unfinished wheel hanging out up here at the top, which is going to help us start the next row. And for the next row, we enter the next stage of the bag, which is to add another row which incorporates not only the top edge of the bag but also the handles. And where we've stopped here is where we're actually going to start building up the handle. We're going to work a little bit and work our way up vertically. And since the wheels are a little bit different for this, I'll go through that a little bit more slowly. So to start the handle in our marked stitch here, or wheel, we need to put 2 more spokes and chain 2. And next we add a wheel that's going to sit here, and we are going to work this wheel all the way around. It will have 5 joins and of course the 12 spokes. Now add 5 more spokes to the next wheel, and after the last spoke of this wheel, the marker in, we're going to finish it off a little bit differently with a chain 1 and actually find the stitch that's got the yarn tail in, and we're going to do a single crochet into that stitch to finish off this wheel, and then chain 2. For the next row, we're going to start a new wheel, and this time we are going to have 2 joins straight away, and then we work until there are 4 spokes before moving on to the next wheel. Next, we will put an entire wheel all the way around in this next space, and of course it will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 joins and 12 spokes. And next, return to the incomplete wheel here, put 3 more spokes into this wheel, and end with a chain 3 this time before moving on. So ending with a complete wheel and a 7 spoke wheel here with chain 3 at the end. For the next row, start a wheel that will have 1, 2, 3, 4 joins and 6 spokes. And after the chain 2, of course, add a complete wheel here at the end, which will have 1, 2, 3 joins at the beginning, and of course 12 spokes. Add 6 more spokes to the next wheel. And after the 6th spoke, we finish off with chain 1, slip stitch into the chain 3 space. And we've got another extra little step here with chain 2 and a slip stitch in the first space behind the hook. So that just kind of inches our way around the wheel a little bit. And then another chain 2. So since this is the longer handle, we've got more rows to do. So to continue, we're just going to repeat just like we did for this row and then this row back and forth until you have done 10 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And for the last row of the handle, we're only going to do kind of a half row. So remember to do chain 3 after this little half wheel here. Then start a new wheel, which will have 4 joins and 6 spokes. After the 6th spoke, chain 2, start a new wheel here that will have 3 joins, and again just work until you get to the 6th spoke. We're not going to finish it all the way around this time. So that's the top of the handle finished, and before we go on and finish the sides, I would like you to mark this chain 2 with a stitch marker. That will help us kind of navigate later on. So now let's turn things sideways. And of course this side of the handle is even, but this side is not. So let's take care of that now by doing some half wheels along this edge. So I'm going to start a new wheel. It will have 6 joins, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it will have 7 spokes. So after that half wheel has been made, we need to kind of go across the top of this wheel before we start the next one. So to do that, after the 7th spoke of that half wheel, continue with chain 2, a slip stitch into the first space behind the hook. Do that again, the chain 2, another slip stitch in the next space, chain 2, and then we're ready to do the next half wheel that will sit here and so on. So continue that pattern of the half wheel and these kind of connecting chains, and after the last wheel, which should be the 5th half wheel on this edge, it finishes just a little bit differently. Adjust the chain 2. I think I've already done a chain 1 there. Slip stitch into the next space, and then just chain 1 to finish. So that's finished up the bag handle, and you know things are okay if both sides of the handle look the same all the way up. Let's now work along the top edge of the bag for a little bit more. For this next step, we need to do 4 more half wheels. Each wheel will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 joins to start off with, and each will have 7 spokes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And now that those 4 half wagon wheels are on, it's time to do the short handle, and that happens over the last 2 wheels we made. So to start the short handle, just finish off this wheel with 5 more spokes and close it off. Then continue to the next wheel and work 5 spokes on it. And now that all 12 spokes have been worked on this wheel, finish it with chain 1 and a single crochet into the next double treble. And chain 2. To continue the short handle, I'm just going to work another row where you do kind of that half wheel and the full wheel here. So start the next wheel with 2 joins and 4 spokes. Work the next wheel all the way around. It will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 joins. And then continue on the next wheel with 3 more spokes and end with chain 3. There we are. And because this is the short handle, we're almost finished. To continue, all we need to do is do kind of that half row along here, which is a new wheel that has 4 joining points and 6 spokes, and then a new wheel with only 3 joins, and it also has 6 spokes, and end it with chain 2. And I would also like you to mark this chain 2 here, just like we did on the other handle, before we go on. And now the next step is to finish off the side of this short handle. It just needs 1 more half wheel here. So I'll start a new wheel that will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 joins and 7 spokes. And after that, just finish off with chain 2. Slip stitch into the next space. And then just a chain 1. So that's finished the short handle. Except for the top edge, of course. We'll deal with that later. So now that that's done, let's continue along the top edge of the bag a little bit more. We've got 2 more wheels to work, and these occur one on the front and one on the back. So we're going to start traveling around to the other side of the bag now. But just for now, let's just think about the next 2 wheels that will go here and here. So that will be 2 wheels that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 joins each and 7 spokes. The last wheel will end with chain 1. And there we are, those 2 done. And for the next stage, I'm going to flip the bag to the other side. So this is an interesting stage of the project because we are not only going to add some spokes, I should say, along here, we are at the same time going to be joining in the other side of the short handle. So just fold the short handle down, and let me see if I can explain what's going on here. What we're going to do is work as if we were doing another half wheel here, but we are going to work into this floating ring that is already on the end of the handle. Alright, so basically we're just working around using that as the center ring. We will be doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 joins, and we will have 6 spokes. So what we're doing is finding the chain 2 space that has the chain or the stitch marker in. Do a slip stitch in that space that is marked, and then chain 1. Now let me see if I can get this organized so you can see what we're doing. So we're going to continue working our stitches into this next floating ring, and at the same time joining behind the hook. So after that chain 1, do another double treble, chain 1, and we're going back onto the body of the bag to find that first chain 2 space. There's where we join, chain 1, another double treble in that same floating ring, and so on. Another chain 1, find the next chain 2 space, chain 1, and double treble. So again, continue that sequence. So there, that's the 12 spokes. And we close this wheel with a chain 1 slip stitch into the next chain 2 space, which is here, chain 1, and then repeat that same process for the next wheel going into the next floating ring. And I also should have mentioned these new spokes here. We have 4 joins this time at the beginning and an extra couple of spokes here at the end. So the main gist is we've got all 12 spokes for that wheel, and our handle is now pretty much joined. All we have to do is finish with a chain 1 and slip stitch into the next, it's actually a chain 3 space, and then another chain 1. That's the handle seamlessly joined. And now we're ready to go on for the rest of the edge here. So you can see what we've done on the other side on the back. We need to do that now on the front. So add 2 more wheels here with 5 joins each and 7 spokes in the second wheel with a chain 1. So those are those 2 done, and now we do the long handle the same way we did the short one. So just fold down the other side. The next step is to slip stitch into that marked space, chain 1, and just work around these 2 just like you did for the short handle. I'll go ahead and just work that for you now. And now that the long handle is joined, we're on the home stretch. All that's left now are 2 more half wheels that will go along the edge. The first wheel will have 5 joins and 7 spokes, and then coming around back to the front, this next wheel will have 6 joins and 7 spokes. And after the second wheel, end with chain 1 and find the very beginning yarn tail, because we end exactly where we began with a slip stitch into our very first stitch we made in the whole project. And that is the bag part done. And you could right now just fasten it off and you're done. Or if you like, it's totally optional, you can go around all edges with a border of single crochet. That's totally up to you, but I don't mind it the way it is. So I hope you enjoyed making this bag. It is definitely a one-of-a-kind effort, and I realize it might have been kind of challenging because when we have hexagon motifs, and they don't line up the way that seems intuitive sometimes. But hopefully I got you through and broke it down enough for you to understand what was going on. But if there are some questions or concerns, please let me know, and I'll do my best to clear things up. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.